Hello and a very warm welcome to Money Control. I'm Shweta Punj and this is our special budget edition. This budget, the first full budget of the third term of the Modi government, comes at a very difficult and a complicated time. India is grappling a consumption crisis. Plus, you have the uncertainty of a new US president whose policies, from whatever we've seen and heard so far, only add to the uncertainty. So, Ms. Sitharaman has a daunting challenge of balancing fiscal consolidation with boosting consumption. To understand the state of India's economy at this point, the imperatives for what could be a defining budget for India's decade, I have with me noted economist Dr. Surjit Bhalla. Dr. Bhalla, thank you so much for joining us. And um, I was I was thinking about who would be the best person to really break down what's happening around us, because constantly I'm also asked questions on the rupee is falling. What does that mean for India? Does that mean that India's economy is weakening? We are constantly getting comments from business leaders on the consumption crisis that's going on in the country. Wage growth has been slower. So, thank you so much for joining us. And we are hoping to
Pleasure.
really break down the Indian economy bit by bit for our viewers and for our listeners. Thank you so much. Dr. Bhalla, I want to begin by asking you the most fundamental question, which is on everyone's minds, really. And you also conducted a poll on Twitter on you left it open to the people of the X world, so to speak, on what their expectations are from the budget. Will it be a big bang budget, or will it be just another budget? So I want you to talk a little bit about that, and what's your sense on what will this be, a 1991 kind of a budget for India?
Yeah. So thank you for having me. And it was this Twitter poll, I phrased it as, will it be a business as usual budget, or will it be a
Right.
big bang budget? Now, what one means by a
Hmm.
big bang budget is, and you
Hmm.
correctly refer to 1991, which is substantially different and especially in
Hmm.
terms of reforms from what has
Hmm.
happened before. Now, since 1991, India is a country, proud country, which has continued the system of reforms. But
Hmm.
and I should emphasize continued, but there hasn't been any substantial change. Now, the question is, do we
Hmm.
need a substantial change? And on that score, my answer is yes. And we need
Hmm.
substantial change in our policies in terms of our tax rates, which have our
Hmm.
tax collection more appropriately. And we can note the distinction between tax rates and tax collection, as well as our policy towards foreign direct investment. Now, there are three or two policies that have been well known for
Yeah.
decades as very, very
Hmm.
important for for reforms for developing
Correct.
countries. One is
Hmm.
infrastructure, and the
Hmm.
second is technology, foreign investment, industrial growth with technology. That's
Hmm.
where, so we have done a fantastic job on infrastructure. And it started with, one interesting feature of the Indian
Hmm.
economy as since 1991 is that there have been only two prime ministers who really devoted a lot of effort, expenditure, and thinking towards infrastructure development. And both of them have been BJP leaders. Bajpayee, with the starting with the road network, and and
Hmm.
Mr. Modi starting from 2014 onwards, and especially over the last 5 years or 6 years. So, absolutely no change is needed in infrastructure policies. So, what's gone
Sure.
wrong? What's gone wrong, and
Hmm.
I do think if I say that we need a substantial change, there are two policies that are needed to correct what has gone wrong. The first is
Hmm.
our policies towards foreign direct investment. And
Hmm.
this started with 2015. So while the government was reforming on various fronts and bringing in the GST, bringing in bankruptcy codes, etc., and even demonetization, who I believe maybe one of the few economists believe was substantially oriented towards reform in terms of taxation, which
Hmm.
I'll come to now. Um, that so in 2015, what the government did was that it said that there will be no new bilateral investment treaty. Now, what's a bilateral
Hmm.
investment treaty? For decades and by all the countries, they are
Yeah.
involved in foreign direct investment. And just as happens so foreign direct investment is different than portfolio investment because it's actually
Hmm.
for infrastructure, for industry, or for goods, not for portfolio allocation, for manufacturing. Um, and so countries around the world, whether it's China, whether it is the US, whether it is any other country, have policies when nations are involved in direct investment, not money managers. So therefore, there are
Hmm.
rules of the game that are set up for foreign direct investment, and the rules of the game allow for divorce. Very important. You are partners in a big enterprise. If I make investment in any country, I can withdraw it at a moment's notice. But
Hmm.
foreign direct investment is different. You change your mind, well, you are already committed legally to do this enterprise, and but you should be allowed to change your mind. So what countries have done in bilateral investment treaties is that they said, okay, um, first 6 months or so, you try and negotiate amongst yourselves and you reach an agreement. If you don't, then we'll have to go to a judge or an adjudicator or third party. And a third party is a different country than involved
Hmm.
in the FDI. So if England has an FDI with India, or let's take the US has an FDI with India, we have a disagreement, then we'll go to a non-Indian, non-American judge court, and they will decide as to what is the correct policy. That's just like in divorce, you want to go to a neutral person. So, what did the Indian government do starting 2015? Oh, in the new bilateral investment treaties that we will sign, that if there is
Hmm.
a grounds for divorce, you will go to an Indian judge. Now, Indians don't go to an Indian judge. Okay. And
Hmm.
you're telling
Hmm.
me this guy or this investor, FDI, this firm needs to go to an Indian judge. So, if you are the US or if you are England or if you are Switzerland, I think most
Hmm.
people will be in total agreement. Let's go to an English judge, let's go to a US judge. But this is after 200 years of jurisprudence or whatever.
Right.
We have
Right.
a young nation, 75. We aren't there yet. Inshallah, we'll get there in 25 years. Certainly not there yet.
Hmm.
So what the foreign investor
Hmm.
do? They voted with their feet. They said, okay, we will not do any FDI in India anymore. And the impact has been very, very strong and very, very high that you had, and these treaties had to expire before before. So if you are committed in 2015, you sign a 10-year treaty in 2010. you continue according to the
Hmm.
old rules of the game. At least, thankfully, we didn't
Right.
change that, except now there is a
Hmm.
Nestle story
Hmm.
which we can perhaps discuss later.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
basically, now with the numbers, the FDI as a percent of Indian GDP was somewhere
Hmm.
around 2.5%. Okay.
Hmm.
In 22-23, after these various FDI treaties had expired, it was down to
Hmm.
0.8% GDP, a level last seen in India in the mid 1990s. So we
Wow.
have, and technology. Why is FDI important? It brings in technology. Technology is what we
Absolutely.
need at this time.
Hmm.
All countries need technology. You see the whole fight on deep seek and so on and so forth. But you can't have the, we are not there yet. We are there in space, maybe, but we are not there in
Hmm.
various other items. So you need FDI. And so, therefore, I think the first order for the government is to reverse its policies on, and which don't make sense to me, and hasn't made sense to the
Hmm.
foreign investor, hasn't made sense to the Indian investor, because the Indian investor, that Indian firm, is also not willing to go to the
Hmm.
Indian judge. Okay.
Right.
Because
Hmm.
of the suspicion or the fear that the Indian judge will not act in the best interest of the law, will act according to some other motivation. So that's the first big policy that needs correction.
Hmm. Dr. Bhalla, you said that, our FDI as a percentage of GDP has come down substantially. This has happened despite the fact that we have opened up more sectors to for FDI. We've increased the limits.
Yeah.
So why hasn't so this that's what. So from a policy point of view, the intention seems to be that we want more FDI in.
Yes. And but there's other thing that's hurting the Indian
Hmm.
economy, and that is the increase in protection.
Hmm.
Which makes domestic products. Remember, people compare and correctly compare. Okay, the
Hmm.
government and the firms were in collaborating, the chaebols in Korea were collaborating
Yeah.
together, and you just had a few firms operating,
Hmm.
and we want our Indian stars and the government to cooperate, the Indian jewels, the big industrial firms
Right.
collaborate with the government.
Hmm.
Absolutely right. But what's the difference? In the case of Korea,
Hmm.
it
Hmm.
was that they had to go and export. They had to be
Yeah.
internationally competitive. In India,
Competitive.
it seems we are in a reverse gear, that we will protect the Indian firm so that it can stay an infant for much longer. This whole infant
Hmm.
industry argument, they need protection in the early stages, as Jagdish
Hmm.
Bhagwati said long, long time ago, and this is a policy. Infants just become geriatric; they don't grow old; they become geriatric.
Yeah.
So we need to,
Hmm.
my big what I don't understand is that we are practicing in many ways, and I'll give you another example, policies or the method of doing policies that we did in 1800 and haven't changed. So,
Hmm.
take for example, who makes economic policy in India? Okay, the Ministry of Finance. Who does the
Right.
Ministry of Finance? Who, via the Ministry of Finance, makes policies? IAS
Hmm.
Babus. Correct? They are,
Hmm.
they go through where your rank matters and all this other stuff. And your seniority is based on your rank on an exam you took 30 years ago. I mean, this is bizarre, but this is what we
Hmm.
have. And another item on policy, since we're coming up to budget day, you tell me which other country in today's day and age, even 20 years ago, where made the
Hmm.
budget in secret. So, as I've
Hmm.
said several times, and perhaps on your show earlier also for several years, the secrecy in the budget only helps
Hmm.
media, TV, performers, etc., and the senior
Hmm.
IS babus who make policy. Now, one other
Hmm.
item here is important to note that you and I and all of us agree that 1991 was a breakthrough budget. Well, 1991
Right.
budget was not made by the IS babus. It was made by technocrats,
Hmm.
by specialists, okay? Which is the
Hmm.
way it's done in the rest of the world. You get the best
Hmm.
people for the job, not somebody who
Right.
graduated from IAS with a rank of one or two or three. So, we need, and no need for secrecy. We had
Hmm.
very good farm laws, which were not passed for very, very bad performance by the opposition, but
Right.
not in the interest of the country. But at the same time, so why not, just like any policy, have open consultations where all the interest groups are
Right.
brought together, openly discussed,
Hmm.
and then you decide. So I think these are the method of making policy needs changes, and a couple of policies are drastic need for change.
Right. So, Dr. Bhalla, you spoke about how protectionism will only ensure that infants become geriatrics and not competitive. And the Korea example is not exactly what is being panned out in India at this point. Are we saying that the Indian government has been following, a protectionist policy, which would benefit the Indian industry? However, the implication of that is, or at least that's what's assumed, that if Indian industry prospers, which means more jobs, more investments, and so on. We've seen a corporate tax rate cut in the past for India Inc. We've seen moves like removal of that most preferred nation for Switzerland. We've seen import tariffs go up to make Indian industry more atmanirbhar and all of that. So from whatever I'm understanding at the moment, this is working in contrary to what our goal and aspirations are.
No, no, exactly. Um, look, I worked on in the background for the corporate tax cut was much needed when we brought the
Hmm.
corporate tax cut down from 30% to 22% in 2019. Much needed, absolutely. But it's now what is interesting is that the argument is made that in order to address the slowdown, actually, let's come to what is bothering India. We are growing at 6%, 5.5%, or whatever. Okay. And we are the
Hmm.
fastest growing country in the world. That is another,
Hmm.
um, I would say, completely inappropriate claim that we are succeeding, we are the fastest growing country in the world, but your growth has to be measured with respect to the international environment and with respect to your potential. So while the
Right.
government can and does and should take credit that we are growing at, let's say, 6%, what is bothersome and what bothers you and what bothers every other Indian is that we are capable, our potential is to grow at a much faster rate than what we are growing. So, what is
Hmm.
inhibiting that
Yeah.
performance? And that
Hmm.
what is inhibiting that performance is our policies toward, and I believe in competition, just like I hope you do and most Indians do.
Hmm.
And you allow the competitive spirits to flow, you will
Hmm.
see a much improved performance towards our potential. In this regard, and I want to point out, why is it, let's think, why did software and everything associated with software succeed to the degree it
Hmm.
has? The GCCs, etc. These don't seem to be having any problems with competition. right? They are not asking for
Right.
protection, and they are exporting. We are exporting more in services than we are in manufactured goods.
Right.
Why? Because we don't have interest groups involved in affecting our policies towards protection in the case of software. But we have major industrialists, etc., who are very keen to be protected. So I think, this is what I call the deep state, our own deep state in India, in a recent article. And we need to recognize that we need to change policies, become more competitive, whether it's
Right.
software,
So,
whether it is hardware, whether it is industry, whether it is services. And whatever is not making us competitive is what we should
yeah.
address.
So protectionism is not making us competitive. We've seen that. And would you like to see in the budget that the budget should undo all the revisions that we have seen, in the previous budgets where import tariffs are concerned? We spoke about FDI. How can the budget address the FDI issue in a very emphatic manner? And then I'll come to the taxation point as well.
Yeah, the budget, look, budget is and the government itself claims that it is more and correctly claims it's more of a vision statement, what we should be doing on everything that affects the economy. Okay. So, in that regard, what the government can easily do, along with this budget, announce that we are going to be, apart from reducing tariffs, that we are going, import tariffs, that we are going to, you know, get back to the bilateral investment treaties of the past so we can get attract FDI, and which is much needed for our approach to be Viksit Bharat. This is necessary. We won't get there unless we are competitive, and we won't be competitive unless we allow technology to come in when it can, when it should and
Right.
does.
Making India competitive. We've seen schemes like the PLI scheme that has been brought in. It's worked in some sectors. It's yet to take off in some other sectors. What's your assessment on what's holding that back?
No, look, I think the PLI is a good policy. Production linked incentives. Okay. Nothing wrong with it. And matter of fact, perhaps even needed, much needed. But we should, when you want production, I would, instead of calling it PLI, I would call it CPLI, competitive
Okay.
production linked incentives. That's all. So you want every
Okay.
country in the world gives benefits to, that's why I gave the example of Korea, gives benefits to some industrialists or whoever, every country in the world. They should do that. They do
Right.
that. The only problem is in India, we don't link it with competitiveness, we link it with production.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the taxation bit, Dr. Bhalla. Corporate tax rates have come down. Nomura came out with a report saying that the budget needs to bring down corporate tax rates. Would you recommend that to the Indian government?
Look, I think our corporate tax rate is at 22%. Okay. And this was a much needed policy back in 2019 when it was reduced from 30 to 22%. Now, the our competitors. So, what should we do when we look at whether we are being internationally competitive? The most normal, natural thing to do is to compare it with what the tax rates are in other countries, right? And if you look at East Asia, which is our major competitor and which has shown the lead in terms of industrial growth for the last 30 years. And this is all countries in East Asia, not just China. Um, their corporate tax rate, or let me put it this way, their corporate tax rate is around 15%. Okay, which is
Mm.
why in 2019, if you were a new firm, then the government
Mm.
said that for the first 5 years or so, your tax rate should be reduced. Will be
Mm.
reduced to, I think, 15%. Now, that's where we want to get to. And I think um, any approach towards getting to competitive, defined as East Asia manufacturing corporate tax rates, or any corporate manufacturing or services, should be there. That's number one. Now, the other unfortunate, and as you know, and there's been a lot of discussion in the literature, or in the press rather, which is the literature in India, is that we I have been concentrating on not so much the corporate tax rate in my analysis and in my suggestions,
Yeah.
with the individual tax rate. And
Yes.
the individual tax rate in India is very, very high. And it affects
Mm.
incentives, individual
Mm.
incentives. And then you've got to ask
Absolutely.
as to what you're getting. So, why do countries tax? Countries tax because
Mm.
they need resources for infrastructure. They need
Mm.
resources for public goods. They need resources for technological development, for subsidies, etc.
Mm.
So let's look at the countries that have really performed well. You know, they
Mm.
all, East Asia, the average tax to GDP ratio is around
Mm.
13 to 15%. That means all taxes, huh? Individual taxes,
Yeah.
corporate taxes, value added taxes, GST, etc. So they
Mm.
find that they can do all of their objectives by and having some deficits, because no country has zero deficit. So you add 3 or 4% deficit for your expenditure. So I'm just talking on the taxes. So that's what is the norm. Just like, why do we need a corporate tax cut? Let's look at how other countries are doing it. So why do we
Mm.
need a personal income tax? Because our incentives of production for individuals
Mm.
is affected. The second
Mm.
important reason why we should cut we have had a substantial increase in individual taxation. The
Mm.
reason in actual tax collection, the reason that has happened is, and this I will now get to my major point, which is, why is the middle class so upset? Let's agree very
Mm.
simply that it's only the middle class and the really rich who pay taxes. That's fair.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at the real disposable incomes
Mm.
of the middle class, as well as the rich, but let's exclude the top 1%, etc. If
Right.
you look at the real disposable income of the middle class, it has
Mm.
gone down since 2011, and gone down by about 20, 30, 40% in real terms. Okay. So
What data
why are
is this,
we
sir?
able to, sorry?
What data is this? This disposable
This
income?
is this is the government's own data, okay, which I've been
Mm.
analyzing, etc. The government, very good,
Mm.
and the government should be complimented for this. The CBDT and the Ministry of Finance, released by the Ministry of Finance, across, for how much
Mm.
taxes, how many individuals pay income tax, how many individuals pay um, capital gains taxes, total taxes, etc., and what their average
Mm.
incomes are in nominal terms. So they graded by 0
Mm.
to 1.5 lakhs annual income, 1.5 to 3 lakhs, 3 to 5 lakhs, and so on and so forth, all the way to 500,000 lakhs, or whatever the upper bound is.
Mm.
Okay, so this is all published,
Mm.
all government's own data, which I have been asking the government for the last 5, 7 years,
mm,
that they should release
mm,
this on a unit level data rather than a composite. Uh,
mm,
and let's hope that they will do that because it's very, very useful for analysis. And that's where
mm,
I get the result that the real
mm,
incomes, disposable incomes
mm,
of Indians
mm,
of the middle class has really gone down. So why is our tax
mm,
collection up? Okay, we know that the tax
mm.
collection has really succeeded. Income tax collection, it's gone up
Right.
because there's been a lot more employment. And the government doesn't know
Mm,
how to present that data because they are
mm,
succumbed to the opposition saying there's no employment, there are no jobs, etc. A substantial increase
mm,
in jobs, salaried jobs, has taken place.
mm.
And because the opposition is caught in a time warp, our government
Right.
wants to placate them. I don't know why. So they should be announcing from the top of the world, which I'm going to be announcing, that look, we have
Mm,
succeeded very well in providing
mm,
jobs, salaried jobs.
mm.
Okay. So
Right.
your tax
Mm,
revenue has gone up because salaried jobs, which
mm,
come in the formal tax net, because your tax gets deducted at source and so on and so forth, has the number of
mm,
individuals has substantially gone up, but
mm,
the, the wage hasn't.
mm,
Okay. So there are more
mm,
people
mm.
earning 1,000 rupees or a lakh of rupees a year or 10 lakhs of
Sure.
rupees a year. Take whatever level you want. There are more people doing that. So
Mm,
therefore, there's more tax revenue
mm,
and compliance has gone up. So the
mm,
various, that's a success story. And
mm,
the what is not a success story is that the real incomes have gone down, which is why they are unhappy. Disposable income.
mm,
Okay. And
mm.
there's another story, perhaps another, that even for those salaried individuals around the world, skilled individuals around the world, and this I've discussed several times, are not going up
Mm,
at all, actually. Okay? Because
mm,
there's
mm.
a global glut of college educated people. But that's besides the point. Simple
Right.
point is
Mm,
that we have succeeded in providing a lot of salaried jobs, but
mm,
we have taxed the hell out of our people, the middle class, which is why they are upset. And
mm,
that I want to come to that the reason the government should change policy
mm.
on February 1st. First and
Right.
foremost, it's good politics. Okay? It's
Right.
good politics to reduce tax rates because people are unhappy and we are taxing too much. It's
Mm,
also good economics. The third
mm,
thing that will I hope will happen after the compliance increases, etc., there is less of this freebies that the government feels, oh, we've got so much tax revenue, let's go and give freebies. And the PM has been very explicit, has talked against freebies. So there's
yeah.
no discipline. When you get an excess of surplus, right, you become inefficient,
Mm,
or you
mm,
become whatever adjective you want to use. So, but we are going ahead and competing with everybody. All the politicians are competing with each other because they have resources, your resources,
mm,
my resources, which are not being
mm.
put to efficient use. So
Right. So, what do you recommend, Dr. Bhalla? Do you recommend an additional tax slab, which because currently anybody earning over 20 lakhs, if I'm not correct, if I'm not wrong, has to pay, I think, 30% income tax. So there is no
yes.
mid slab in it. So, what do you recommend in the income tax reforms agenda of the government? Because it does feel you're right, it does feel very unfair for for middle class taxpayers to pay the kind of tax that we pay for the services that we are getting.
Yeah. And in addition to that, let's look at what is happening with GST, etc. So the middle class also has a
Mm,
lot of consumption taxes that it pays. Okay.
Yeah.
So the aggregate for the middle class is a tax incidence of something like 40,
Mm,
45% for the average person. If you add the consumption
mm,
taxes for those earning more than 20 lakhs or more than 15 lakhs. Okay. So
mm,
they purchase refrigerators, they got to pay a tax. They purchase, most luxury goods uh,
mm.
20 years ago are commonplace goods today. Cars, for example, for the
That's
middle
right.
class, it seems. So,
Yeah.
it is, and very good point you raise. And I think the angst for the middle class and why it is upset, and I link it to why my forecast for the election went wrong in June, as well as every other forecasters. But that's
Yeah.
not enough compensation. One got it wrong, one got it wrong. So now the idea is not the idea, the question is why did the BJP, why did a very popular prime minister like Mr. Modi lose the election in terms of he was supposed to get 330 seats and got about 90 seats less? Okay. So that's
Right.
why did that happen? And I think it happened because of the middle class. Never, my old saying is never bet against the US, and my new saying is never bet against the middle class. The middle class is the
Mm,
one that makes opinions. The middle class is the one that provides all of the inputs for decision making. The middle class is the
mm.
one that provides all the taxes. And if
That's
they
right.
get upset, you're playing with danger.
Hmm. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Bhalla, for that. That was a very, very lucid account of all that, all that we need to take into account with India aspiring to be the third largest economy in the world. Their big aspirations. The challenges are also big. And, as we said at the start of the show, this budget is an opportunity for the Modi government that's in its third term, which in itself is such a feat, for the
Yeah.
government to really think out of the box, push through reforms that have been on the back burner for various reasons, whether it is political, whether it is, just uh, just the fact that everyone's been in an electioneering mode, and somewhere the budget making exercise seems to have taken a back seat. But just to repeat what you've said, that this budget should be like a 1991 like budget for the Modi government, because the time is now. We hope to catch up with you, Dr. Bhalla, after the budget to get a sense of what you thought about it once Ms. Sitaraman presents it on the 1st of February. Thank you very much for joining us, and a big thank you to all our viewers for tuning in. Do send us your thoughts, feedback, and any questions that you might have for Dr. Bhalla right here in the comment section. Thanks so much for watching. We'll be back with more such analysis and interviews on Money Control Special Budget Edition. Thank you.